characterizing loss of digital evidence due to abstraction layers. So what we did is we created a formal model mapping different layers and analyzing what gets lost due to abstraction layers. Felix Franning is from the FAU, as you probably know, and Hans Weiser is from the University of Passau. I'm self-employed, working as a trainer and consultant in the IT infrastructure area, so virtualization, storage, networking, backup, and also providing lab environments. And I'm in the process of becoming a PhD student. So, this is our agenda for today. So we introduce some terms, then we talk about contributions, definitions, and identify the model in practice, and then we come to the conclusions. So abstraction layers are hierarchically, we probably know that. There's a higher layer which is mapped to a lower layer. There is, you can use it to efficiently manage resources. One example would be what we just heard is deduplication, which is an abstraction layer. Another example would be lazy allocation. So for example, if 2 terabyte hard disk is allocated, that only the space that is currently in use is physically allocated. The details of the lower layers are usually hidden from higher layers, at least in most cases, because they are not necessary by the higher layers. What's a problem, or could be a problem, is to establish authenticity. Often you try to strive for the lowest layer possible in order to give this authenticity. However, in cloud environments, this might not always be applicable because you don't have access to the lower layers. Then ambiguity and the possibility of interpretation errors. So let me give one example. For example, when you have virtual machine hard disks, they can be fully provisioned. That means the space is allocated. However, they are lazy initialized. So what that means is that the space is blocked, but it's not overwritten. So the blocks may contain all data. And if you're not cautious, you might attribute blocks which never belong to a virtual machine hard disk to this virtual machine hard disk because you did not interpret the data structures correctly. And lower layers might be out of reach. We already talked about this. So our question is, under which conditions is it possible to reconstruct higher levels of abstraction from data given at lower layers of abstraction? We distinguish between actively used, deleted, overwritten, or otherwise unused data. Some things are unable to be interpreted, especially deleted files. So for the active, it should, if there's no data corruption, always be possible. And we have a lot of abstraction layers. We will later see in the practical example that just in a usual environment, we have up to 9 abstraction layers, sometimes even 11 or more. That could be problematic. And the other thing is that you might have concurrent access, which could add fragmentation. So sometimes you have up to 200 virtual machines on one host, which then, of course, makes it even harder for the attribution. Good, and attribution I already talked about. So when you have 200 tenants on one single hard disk or physical storage device, it might be hard to attribute which data belongs to which one, especially if it's deleted or no longer being used. Good, there are some related works. So abstraction layers are used in software and hardware design, we know that. We have abstraction transformation functions from Carrier. He goes a little bit deeper than we do, so he also attributes, for example, problems in the implementation of the reverse engineered data structures, which are not fully understood, and also, of course, problems while collecting the evidence, corruption, all that. Virtualization poses problems to incident handling forensics, obviously, because you cannot access the layers you probably want to access, and also probably due to attribution. Good. Attribution we already talked about, recovering deleted files and process from memory. This is of course possible in most cases. However, for example, if you need to collect memory dump from a hypervisor, you probably need to take this hypervisor offline, which could affect multiple users, which again is a problem. And there are cloud environments which aid forensic analysis. One would be this example. Another example, which I probably find better, is Decoding from the University of Michigan, where you can actually replay every single instruction if you want multiple weeks or months back. Obviously, you will never find such an environment in a production environment, so this is more an academic approach. Good. Cloud-native artifacts can only be acquired by physical access, at least partly. However, the APIs and also network file systems are changing, so that this might change in the near future. Okay, our contribution is a formal model. We derive conditions for evidence collection. We focus on block-based storage. By block-based storage, we also mean memory, so pages. And of course, they might be fragmented, and they also might be different size. We talk about active and inactive data. So by active data, we mean that files that currently exist, and by inactive data, for example, data that has been removed. Yeah, and what we will see later is that our conditions are only partly satisfied by real data structures. So we look at a few later in the evaluation, and then some data is lost through abstractions. So we cover file systems which memory, guess, physical memory, logical volumes, and RAID. However, the model could also be improved, for example, to the application level if desired. Good, and what we ignore completely is API-based storage abstractions like NFS, because they hide state information, but what we will see later on that this might probably change. Okay, we look at a layer, a single level abstraction at a time. We have an upper and lower layer. The upper points to the lower layer, and each layer provides computation storage resources. We focus mainly on storage resources, and the upper layer is implemented by using resources from the lower layer, which is probably obvious. Storage in our case can be either memory or disk. Both layers consist of a finite order of block sequence. On the hard disk, you can think of it as a logical block address. Memory, you can think of a page number. Yeah, block sizes on the upper and lower layer can differ, but however, they don't have to do so, and each block is identified by a unique index. So here we see a mapping. We have our upper layer U and our sequenced blocks, which are pointing to the lower layer, and also sequences. And we have here our phi t. So what this one is doing is our mapping at the point t. So t is of course increasing. We need the scale in order to identify what we will later see the most recently deleted block. So here we see that one points here, and then two other point to this one. That, for example, would be an example for lead application. Or here that one upper layer blocks points to two lower layer blocks. There might be a difference in the block size. Okay, mappings change over time. So here in the beginning, we don't have any mapping. We see here that the time increases. We still have our upper and lower layer and our mapping phi t. And here you can see that two are showing to the same one. Then here the mapping is changed, and here it's changed again, and here it's completely removed. So that mappings change over time is clear. When we talk of a previous mapping being removed, we call it unmapped. If a mapping is held, we call it mapped. And unmapped blocks are of special interest for digital forensics. You probably know that. So what we here look at is the most recent deletion time. So here currently we don't have any mapping. Here we have an active mapping, and here this dotted arrow means that we have a deleted block. Yeah, so this is a no longer active mapping, which used to be active. And here we can see that another mapping for this underlying block has been changed, and then here it has been moved, and here it has been changed again. And what we will later see is that we are actually like to identify the most recently deleted point. Then we have mapping aware and mapping agnostic lower layers. So what does it mean? So the normal layer is mapping agnostic. That means the lower layer doesn't know if a block or page is currently in use. And then we have mapping aware layers, so that the lower layer knows if the block is currently in use or not. An example for that might be unmap or trim. You probably have heard of it. So SCSI unmap is a SCSI command which allows to release a block in the lower layer. This is implemented on SSDs and also on enterprise storage systems, like we later see on the FreePub, but also different vendors. And trim is the equivalent for the IDE command, which is also in in every SSD currently there in the last 10 years or something. Trim might return, after the block has been trimmed, might return the content, while unmap doesn't do that. Yeah? So unmap is specified to return zeros once issued, trim isn't. Yeah, and so we have mapping aware and mapping agnostic lower layers. Of course, the mapping aware layers pose a big problem for evidence collection because that means that our data could be faster released and so no longer be available when someone wants to do the acquisition of evidence. Good, evidence collection depends on the level of access and yeah, can be collected at the upper or the lower layer. So sometimes yeah, you only have access to an upper layer. Other times you want to strive for the lowest layer necessary to capture the relevant information. So in the case of unmap or trim, that could mean chip off, yeah, because through the SATA or SAS interface of the disk, you no longer can access the block unless, of course, you modify the firmware. And usually you strive for bit by bit or block by block or page by page copy, depending on what is the access pattern. Good, we already talked about active mappings and deleted mappings, and we defined 3 increasingly powerful notions of reconstruction. So the first problem is finding and decoding phi. So phi is the management data structure which is used to go from the upper layer to the lower layer. It might be stored on the lower layer, it might be stored somewhere else in memory, and it can be very, very time consuming to reverse engineer such a thing. For example, when you look at the VMFS file system or the VXFS file system from Veritas, so it took multiple years and the reconstruction or the reverse engineering is still incomplete. So this can be very cumbersome, especially if it's an exotic file system. Yeah, then we have our first definition, which is the active mappings reconstruction. So giving a copy of the evidence of the lower layer at time t. Solving the active mappings reconstruction means that we find and decode phi t from the evidence and enumerate all elements of phi t. So this is the easy case where everything is mapped. The definition 2 takes definition 1 as a baseline and adds the last constraint, so enumerate a non-trivial subset delta of all the mappings of phi t, and the empty set is only allowed if there are no deleted mappings do not exist. Well, we need this condition, otherwise we are unable to distinguish between definition 1 and 2. And the last deleted mappings reconstruction adds another constraint to enumerate the most recently deleted mappings from that subset. Yeah, we have here a little dilemma, and the dilemma is that the deleted mappings reconstruction, the last deleted mappings reconstruction could be folded together because the set is, or might be, because the empty set might be added. So if you have any idea how we could formulate this constraint better, to distinguish between deleted mappings and the last deleted mappings reconstruction, we would really like to hear your feedback. Okay, so identify the model in practice. We focus on a particular abstraction layer and concrete implementation. So identification of the upper and lower layer, we name the evidence. We exclude, we already talked about this, memory backup and disk snapshots. For, of course, evidence collection, backups, memory, and disk snapshots might be very, very interesting because you can find a lot of artifacts in there. However, now backup software also gets mapping aware. For example, when we look at Veeam, backup software for VMware, which is often used, it actually analyzes the NTFS file system to identify which blocks are being currently used and only backups the blocks which are actually referenced. And in addition to that, it can, for example, remove blocks from complete paths. So you can, for example, say, I don't want to back up my Windows directly on my temp file or my user, and so on. So this is, of course, for evidence collection, a really big problem because now the backups also lack data. Yeah, we look at pure management mechanisms. That means the active mapping, so excluding backup memory and disk, and of course the pure management and backups, for example, is a little bit blurred. Good, so let's have a look at a usual environment. So up here we have a hypervisor. In our example we choose an ESX server. We have here 2 virtual machines running on that host. Yeah, first we look for the virtual address space. This is where software lives in, that would be the kernel or userland application, which is mapped to the guest physical address space, which is part of the physical memory, and simulated PCI devices, which is then mapped to the host physical, which is the real RAM and the physical PCI devices. Then we have here a file system within the virtual machine, which is on the block device. We could introduce another layer, which, for example, could be the partition table, even if it's trivial. And then we have a virtual machine hard disk. This is just a file. Here it gets hard. For example, VMware supports 7 different formats for virtual machine hard disks. So they have eager zero-tick, that means it's initialized up front. We have lazy initialized, that means it's allocated but not initialized, and the blocks which have been written are marked through a bitmap. Then we have fin allocated, and then we have raw device mapping, which just passes through commands to the physical device. Then we have NFS, and then we have sparse files, which use a very small block size, 4K, and also fin provision. So you see there's a variety of different virtual machine disk formats, and every one comes with some problems or the other. Okay, and then we have here a cluster file system, which means that up to 2048 hosts can access that, and we access usually through SCSI, so that here in this case iSCSI or filer channel storage array. As example, we use FreePA, however we can use any other vendor, EMC, NetApp, or even the Linux kernel has a target implementation which can do iSCSI and filer channel. And we have here volume, and this volume is striped over nodes. So nodes are physical entities, and every physical disk is connected to 2 nodes. So in case one node is failing, the other node can take over the disks so that the data stays accessible, also necessary during firmware updates. And what we can see here, so this is a stripe across all nodes. So in this case we have 2 nodes. In the case of FreePA you can have up to 8 nodes. And then we have a RAID set. In this case we have a RAID 1, but it could also be a different RAID set. It's RAID 1 with set size 2, that means there are 2 copies in the system. And the special thing on the FreePA, which many other storage systems do these days as well, is that it allocates for one volume chunks from each disk of the same class. That means if you have 300 disks in there, you get the idea. You allocate 1 gigabyte at a time from every disk, and once you have allocated 1 gigabyte from every disk, you allocate the second gigabyte from every disk. Yeah, of course, this makes it very complex to reconstruct the same. And also, of course, this is a big issue if you need to collect the evidence. When we talked about 8 terabytes this morning, what about petabyte? Yeah. Okay, good. So much for that. So this are the abstraction layers in practice. So now we looked at a few examples. So the first example is the virtual memory management in Linux. I don't know if you're familiar with this. So this is a page walk. So we want to do map virtual address to physical address. I used the 32-bit example. So the first 12 bits is easy. It's just 1 by 1 because other than the deduplication, pages are aligned. It means you can pass through the last 12 bits, which is to the power of 12, which is 4096, the page size of the 32-bit system. And then for the here you have the CF3 register, which maps the virtual to the physical address space. So each process has its own value stored there, and then you go to the page index and take here the first 10 bits as a page index. With the direct bit set, you're done. If not, you have a second indirection and take the next 10 bits to find the offset, and then you're done. This is a page walk for 32-bit system. For 64-bit, it's equivalent. The only difference is that you don't have 2 abstraction layers, but 4. The page size is not 4K, but 8K. And yeah, what we found out is when a page is unmapped from a process, which is very unlikely because libc doesn't do that if you don't ask explicitly for it. So if you do free library call. You probably will not run an spray command in order to free the page. What we saw is when you do that is that the data structure is overwritten and you no longer can find the last deleted mapping. However, of course, the active mapping you can reconstruct. So this solves definition 1 but not definition 2. However, using other methods, you could of course interpolate that so that you probably also can solve the definition 2, but for our example, we focus strictly on what we can prove here. Good, then another very simple example is the DOS MBR partition management. So we have 4 partitions, start, stop, and the partition number. Again, when you delete a partition, it's zeroed out, so you can't identify the last deleted pointer. So that means you have, you get the idea, no idea where this partition is. In practice, again, of course, you can interpolate because you can look, for example, for the beginning of a signature of a file system or swap space or whatever, and then reconstruct the data, or you can look for a hole. However, when we only use this data structure as evidence, it only solves definition 1. And the last example is the logical volume manager of Linux, the LVM2. I quickly explain the same. So we have here a volume group 0. We have a logical volume. Logical volume consists of virtual extents. They are usually 4 megabyte by default, which map to physical extents, which are also 4 megabyte in size. And there is a 1 megabyte label. Okay, the label is only 512 bytes, but the rest is then the meter region. So 1 megabyte minus 512 byte. And in there is a plain text data structure stored with a pointer that describes the mapping. And the nice thing here is that this data structure is usually less than 4 kilobyte, but we have here almost 1 megabyte of size. And that means we find here multiple iterations, so we can solve the deleted mappings problem and also the most recently deleted mappings problem, so our definition 2 and 3. And here's an example of such a thing. So in the beginning, LV0, as we can see here, was a free virtual extents big, and then it was shrinked to only use 1 physical extent. So here we have 2 deleted mappings. And then another logical volume was created. Due to space concerns, it has to reuse the physical extents, and then we have them here. Of course, as soon as logical volume 1 writes data here, it doesn't help us to reconstruct any evidence, because then the data is overwritten and useless for us. But until that, it's possible. Then here we see quickly the text format. Let's quickly go here. We have ID, which is unique. We have this sequence number, which is increased every time it changes. We have an extent size, which is by default 4 megabytes, so this is in blocks, yeah, 512 byte blocks. And then we have the physical volumes, again with the unique identifier, which you can find in the meter region, the device size, and again in blocks, and the start, and the PE count. And this is again in blocks, 512 byte blocks, so it's 1 megabyte. And how many physical extents we have here. And then we have a logical volume. We have here an ID, creation time, the segment count. Segment count is space which is continuously allocated. The start extent, how big it is, if it's striped. In this case, there's only 1 physical volume, so it doesn't really matter if it's striped or linear. And then where it starts, and this is a mapping that describes from the upper to the lower layer, or what we reference as a management layer. Good. Then let's come to the conclusion. So we looked at the effect of abstraction layers on forensic evidence collection. What we saw is that collection on higher layers is often inferior to lower layers. Then something similar, the semantic gap. So that means that the higher layers actually hide information from the lower layers. And then we have logical access restricts evidence from mapping-aware systems. So this means if you have any lower layer which knows if blocks are being referenced or not, you can do garbage collection. For example, from the SSD, when you do a SCSI unmap, the block is no longer accessible. You have to do chip off or go patch the firmware. And also there's a garbage collection, of course, on the SSD, which is sometimes done after a power cycle, which then pre-erases blocks and you no longer be able to access it. On the FreePass, it is once a night, that blocks are being released when you do that, for example, on a volume with string provision. Good, then evidence collection using APIs and proofs. An example for that would be NFS version 4.2, which is currently in the standardization process. So currently, for example, when you retrieve via NFS a large file, you have to read every block because you don't know if it's physically allocated or not. In NFS 4.2, you can actually see if it's physically allocated or not. Good, then mapping agnostic systems, the mappings can often be recovered unless overwritten. Yeah, we already saw that. So if it's agnostic, the blocks are not actively being reused. And that means if no one written to that particular block, it can be recovered. And yeah, one thing that we have to think about is, for example, when we look at the Courier paper, we can see that yeah, file systems might be more complex than our model is. Of course, maybe we can just flatten the file system in order to fit our model. However, we still have to think about what we are going to do here. And yeah, what we probably will do in the future is develop a tool which implements some of these mappings and the compositionality. That means that we, so currently we look at one abstraction layer at a time, that they default multiple abstractions in one piece and be able to access them. For the active mappings, this is trivial. For the, or at least if the management data structures are well understood, for other things, this could be could be much harder. Okay, that's it for me. So if you have any questions, yeah, go ahead.
Time for one or two more short questions. Everyone is tired at the end of the day. No questions, okay? Let's thank our speaker.